And when you look it up in the Greek and Hebrew, it's defined basically as a follower or a student. So a disciple, you can be a disciple of CrossFit, you can be a disciple of the Army, which many of us are in some ways and facets. However, what I'm referring to here is a disciple of Jesus. So we are a follower of Jesus Christ, and we're a student of Jesus. We're learning from him in order to figure out what truth is and what good and evil is. So that's a little bit of a background. One other quick thought that I want to share is spiritual multiplication. Has everybody heard that term, spiritual multiplication? No hands, I assume. Maybe a couple? Okay, perfect. So basically, if you look at it from a simplistic form, if this is me, and over the course of, let's just say, the next year, I can pass on the truth and knowledge of Jesus Christ to 3 individuals, just arbitrary number, 3 people, and then I teach them not only who Jesus is and what his scriptures say, but then they also get a vision for passing that message on to 3 other people. If you look at that, now this guy's going to pass it on to 3 more. Now this guy or gal is going to pass it on to 3 more. Likewise. So you can start to see how, the first year I may be only affecting 3 people. Now the second year, when I find more people to invest in, they're now investing in others. So you can see how things multiply quickly, exponentially as a matter of fact. So that's the concept behind spiritual multiplication. So what I'm going to talk tonight is basically some stages in discipleship. So the initial question, do you identify yourself as a disciple of Jesus? Or do you identify yourself as a disciple maker for Jesus? And I'll come back to that after we get through talking about some of these verses and how they connect. If I could, just get some volunteers. I've got a verse bank over here, and I'll try to draw these out. But can I get somebody to pick up John 8:31 and 32? Thanks. John 1:39. Andrew. Mark 4:34. Thank you. Hebrews 5:11 through 14. Got it. Mark 3:14.
Yeah.
I'll get you on the next one. You'll take Acts 4:13. Yeah. And then John 13:34 and 35. Thank you. All right. So what I'm going to talk about initially is basically passing on knowledge that's gained from walking with Christ and having an in-depth personal relationship with Jesus, and how we can pass that information on. So what does that look like? What are we passing on? And so I think initially it starts with passing on knowledge. So how do we do that? Well, I think the best way to answer that question is, how did Jesus do that? And so if you look in the Gospels and you look at what Jesus did, there's so many examples. I'll just name 2. So the Sermon on the Mount. If you look at that, starting in Matthew 5 all the way through 7, Jesus is just giving some pretty amazing teaching to the people that are there, that are surrounding. If you look throughout the rest of the scriptures, he taught in parables constantly to the people that he was around. He was constantly imparting knowledge. And so the way that this is passed on, I'll try to use some color so it stands out, is through teaching. So can I get someone to, whoever volunteered for John 8:31 and 32? Eric.
To the Jews who had believed in him, Jesus said, "If you hold to my teaching, you are really my disciples. Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free."
Yeah, so we have to know the truth. We have to know who Jesus is. And so if you look at this progression, I think this is pretty synonymous with when Jesus came and was baptized, and he saw John the Baptist, and John the Baptist identifies who Jesus is in John 1. And then the 2 disciples that were there next to John start following Jesus in John 1, verse 39. Can someone go ahead and read that?
He said to them, "Come and you will see." So they came and saw where he was staying, and they stayed with him that day, for it was about the 10th hour.
Yeah, so this is like a come and see. So if you look at this on the surface level, I think that this is, if you look at it from what it takes or the sacrifice, I think you can pretty much do this about one time a week. and you can start to gain knowledge of who God is, of what truth is, and what that looks like. So it doesn't take a very high commitment to be in this gaining knowledge phase. I would say the majority of Christians, not to categorize all of them, but I would say a vast majority, more than not, stop their progression here. They don't really start to dive down this chain of commitment. And so unfortunately, it's just knowledge and it doesn't go further. We're going to continue down. So I think the commitment here is relatively low. You can come once a week, hear someone teach a good message, go home, gain some head knowledge, and it may or may not make much of a change in your life. I'm not saying that passing on knowledge is bad. Please don't hear me say that. Messages that you hear and truth that is spoken is definitely good. Definitely one of the ways that you can learn more about God. But this is not the end-all, be-all. So let's look at this a little bit deeper. Can someone share Mark 4:34?
He did not say anything to them without using a parable, but when he was alone with his own disciples, he explained everything.
Yeah. So you have Jesus who is speaking to the people in parables. And so this verse came just after he talked about the parable of the 4 soils in Mark. And so one of the verses I really like is out of just prior to that, after the 4 soils. He said to his disciples and those who remained, he basically taught them the deeper truth about who he was. So I think what was emphasized in that version of the 4 soils to me is there is a deeper commitment. It's not the audience who's just there to hear what this guy has to say. It's the audience that comes to Jesus and really wants to know who he is. What did you mean when you said that? What is the truth behind the parables that you're delivering to these people? And so I think he was able to pass on, Jesus was able to pass on ministry skills through a guided experience. And so if you look at that, through this guided experience, there were many times that he sent the disciples out, right? He sent them out 2 by 2, and they went out to evangelize, and then they came back and gave an AAR. When he fed the 5,000, how did he do that? He blessed the food, but who was serving? Who were collecting? It was the disciples, right? The people that were there serving everyone else. And so I think those are just some basic examples of how Jesus took the 12 and took them on this experience of how that he could communicate who his Father was and who he was. And so I think when you look at this progression of commitment, it increases, right? Because now it's the people that stayed behind, the people who came to the feet of Jesus. I think it's going to take more time. These are arbitrary numbers, but I think the point here is it's going to take more commitment on our part as disciples and more commitment really to seek Jesus and to seek counsel through other believers that might be more mature than us. Can someone go ahead and read, actually before I share that, this is a verse for me. So what did this look like, passing on knowledge? In my life, I grew up in the church, so I thought I had a good understanding of who Jesus was. However, my life did not look anything like the Scripture. I was not walking in the truth. And it wasn't until I came here, and a guy named Jamie Fisher, some know him, he's moving, anybody who wants to help him. He came, he was actually issuing me my flight gear and some of my deployment kit right before I left, and he's like, hey, do you believe in Jesus? And he challenged me, and I was like, oh, I do, yeah. He's like, well, would you be interested in a Bible study? Sure, that sounds great. And he just basically started to help me see. He started to pass on some knowledge, like come and see, come and check this out. And that definitely helped propel me into seeking Christ. If you fast forward now, passing on ministry skills, that was basically as I started to see what this community was about, and I started to figure out, well, how am I going to grow in this discipleship process? One of the natural things that came out of it was we went recruiting. And so I remember specifically going out with Jamie and going to the PX and just sharing Christ with people that I had never met before. I was super nervous, super uncomfortable. It was not a necessarily a fun or pleasant thing, but I think it was definitely something that God calls us to do. And through that evangelism, I was able to share faith. I was able to see through my success and failures, and through him coaching me in that process, I was able to start developing some ministry skills. I was like, man, now I can really share some of the basics of who Christ is, and what the truth of the Gospels are to someone that may not know him. I started to develop some of these skill sets. Just one example of how we can guide someone through an experience to pass those things on. And I think Jesus was constantly doing this with the disciples. He was constantly taking them on these guided experiences. One of the verses that really spurred me to go from passing on knowledge to passing on, really trying to figure out what this looks like, is Hebrews 5:11 through 14. Can someone go ahead and read that?
About this we have much to say, and it is hard to explain, since you've become dull of hearing. For though by this time you ought to be teachers, you need someone to teach you again the basic principles of the oracles of God. You need milk, not solid food. For everyone who lives on milk is unskilled in the word of righteousness since he is a child. But solid food is for the mature, for those who have their powers of discernment trained by constant practice to distinguish good from evil.
Yeah, so that verse, as I read through the scriptures, and I'm like, man, I'm 20 couple years old. I've called myself a believer for as long as I can remember, but yet I have somebody teaching me the basics of Christianity and how to share that with others. And so I felt like that guy that needed milk, not solid food. And so this verse cut me, and it was a good cut, one of those that God was spurring me on to try to know him more and be able to share that. And so that verse really stood out to me, and I really started to pursue Christ hard. And I really started to get more time. So the commitment level increases. So as you continue down, commitment increases. And I would equate this with Jesus. When he called his initial disciples in Matthew 4, he said, "Come and follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." So initially he said, "Come and see." And then he said, "Come and follow me." And so I think that level of commitment deepens, right? So there's going to be more commitment on our part to know Jesus more, is the big point there. All right, last, not necessarily all-inclusive, but the last point I'm going to make tonight is we pass on character. And so how do we do that? How do we pass on character to someone else? Do we just tell them how to be a good person and walk away? Like, what does that look like practically? And I think Jesus did this. He did it through example, right? He was the perfect example. He came from the Father. He was sinless, and all of his interactions were perfect. It is a perfect example for us to look at and follow. And so as we look through how Jesus passed on knowledge, how Jesus passed on ministry skill, and how he passed on his character, it really, in order to develop and become like someone, how many people notice that they have the same characteristic traits of their mother or their father? Probably quite a bit of people in the room, right? If you look back at your life up until this point, what percentage would you say that you've had them in your life, like together? Like you've lived co-located either in one house, probably a large percentage of your life up until this point, right? So all that to say is, if I'm going to pass on character to someone, it's going to take a lot of time, and it's going to take a lot of continued interaction. And so I would say that, again, the commitment increases. So if we really want to become more like Jesus, which hopefully we all do, we're going to have to spend more time with Jesus, more time in his word, and more time with people that might be further along this scale and able to teach us and help us in our walk with God. Can someone go ahead and read Mark 3:14?
And he appointed 12, whom he also called apostles, so that they might be with him and he might send them out to preach.
Yeah, so Jesus appointed them so that they might be with him. And so I think that's more on this order. 7 days a week. Be with him. Literally, when he went to the bathroom, when he went to bed, when he got up, literally the whole time they may be with him so that they can figure out how to do what he was doing, teaching. and sharing experience with others, which ultimately is why we're here today. So I think you did a pretty good job. Can someone talk through Acts 4:13 and share that?
Yeah. Now, as they observed the confidence of Peter and John and understood that they were uneducated and untrained men, they were amazed and began to recognize them as having been with Jesus.
Yeah, so these were uneducated and untrained men, but they recognized character, their example, that they had been with Jesus. So they had been so much with Jesus that just like you're somewhat like your parents in certain ways and attributes, they, through their example and their character, they saw Jesus in them. So that's what I want to be. Like 1 John 2:6 says, whoever claims to live in him must walk as Jesus did. So I want people, when they look at my life, to see Jesus. And so as we look through that, can someone quote John 13:34 and 35?
You can I give you love one another as I have loved you. So you must love one another. By this everyone will know that you are my disciples and if you love one another.
Yeah, so this is the new commandment, basically talking about loving one another. I think Jesus was also the perfect example of loving his disciples and passing that on. So the perfect way that we can love people who are in the faith, believers, is to continue to help them see this and continue to grow in the character and likeness of Jesus. And those that are outside of the faith, those who are non-believers, we can continue to share who Jesus is with them, and we can continue to spur and encourage them in that relationship if they're willing. And if they're not, we can just love them and serve them where they are. Just meet the immediate needs that they have and continue to be an example and good character to love them as Jesus loved so many lost people as he shared, as he continued on the earth before his crucifixion. So a way that Jamie, as I shared how he invited me into his life, and then as he passed on character, and he was not the only one, but just for an example, if Jamie didn't invite me into his life and invite me to start this process with him, I would still be up here. I would be good with a Sunday service. And one of the things he challenged me with is if your only spiritual milk is on Sunday, you're starving come next week, 7 days later, to get that next saucer of milk. So how are we being intentional to connect with Jesus on a daily basis and connect with the body of believers? So let's go back to that initial question. Are you a disciple or are you a disciple maker? Can you be one and not the other? Like, can you be a disciple maker and not be a disciple? No, probably not, right? So it's a little bit of a trick question. If you find yourself over here and you find yourself more in this pass on knowledge, that's fine. But what I would encourage you is look to see who else is around you that can continue to help you grow. Get time with each other. We're in a great community. And I know in my life it's made a huge difference in my relationship with God and in my relationship with fellow believers here. Are you growing and maturing in your walk with Jesus? Who is guiding that experience? Do you have someone that you can ask tough questions or you can bring scripture that you don't understand to? And could you devote, based on your devotion currently, do you feel like you could devote more time to following Christ? Could you cut out something that you could replace with more time in the Word or replace with more time in fellowship to where your life would be more centered on Christ and not potentially on things of the world or things that just interest you? And does your life reflect the love and the character of Christ? I think those are some questions. And if you find yourself over here, if you find yourself on the disciple maker side, who has God brought into your life? Like, are there people around your workplace that you can continue to reach out to? And if you find yourself here trying to figure out what this looks like, I guarantee you everyone in here knows something about Jesus that they can pass on to someone at their workplace that has no relationship with them. So I think that the transition from this point over to here is through faith and boldness. And just continue to gain this experience of doing it. The only way that you're going to get bigger in the gym is to do more reps, right? Continue working out. It's the same way with growing in your relationship with Christ. You just need more reps. So I would encourage you to be bold and continue to step out in your own faith to those who may not know Christ. That's all I got for tonight. Does anybody have any questions?
Brad, going from that number 2 to the number 3, 2 to 3 times per week, 4 to 7 times per week, seems like a pretty big jump. I think a lot of people can get maybe 2 or 3 times a week with somebody, but to start getting 4 to 7 is quite a bit. What are some of the practical ways to kind of help create an environment where that's even possible?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's one that I think I continue to wrestle through with different seasons of life. I think there's some seasons that are really busy that, like you said, man, if I can get 2, I'm winning. So Jesus had 7 with the disciples, and it took Jesus, 3 years on earth in his main ministry. So if Jesus had took that long, man, I don't think I'm going to be able to do it any faster, right? So it's a process. It's not an overnight development. So I think the best thing we can do is to prioritize the kingdom with the free time that we have. And everybody shops, hopefully buys groceries to feed themselves and their family. And so all I'm saying is with those things that are natural that you already do, invite people into your life to do those things with you. Everyone eats dinner, eats lunch, eats breakfast. So as you have opportunities with those things that are normal life, invite people. Hey, I'm going to the grocery store. You want to come help? Hey, I got to mow the grass. You want to hang out and do that? So it's about sharing life. It's not just about me sitting down and reading the Bible. It's about me, sharing my quiet time after I mow the grass with someone, or finding out how he's been doing this past week, how his prayer life is, or purity. So I think it's good to be intentional about getting time in the Word together, but it's more than that. I think it's about really just trying to share our life with each other. So really the sky's the limit. Whatever you can think of from an opportunity perspective, whether it's painting the house. I know I've pressure washed some homes with Andrew before. I've done a little bit of anything. So whatever you can make into like a ministry event, I'd say do it.
Now, would I be wrong with thinking as far as like the 4 to 7 times a week, when you're not in a church service, there's online like church services for pastors that are delivering good words. Having that in your regular day, maybe during lunch at least, or something like that, would that still count towards your 4 to 7?
Yeah, I think, and again, these numbers are more of it's a measure of our commitment and devotion, not necessarily hopefully we're all in the Word 7 days a week. That would be my huge encouragement. But in terms of like messages and knowledge, that's great. If you want to supplement your Sunday or your Tuesday night outreach message like this with a podcast or something from a pastor that you know that speaks good truth, that's awesome. I would encourage you, whatever you can do to start to get more Jesus in your life, I think is really the point. So we want to get Jesus personally with our individual devotions, and we want to do it corporately, in the community aspect. I want to be involved in Andrew's life and involved in Mike and my wife's and all the people in the community, right? Because I think those are also extremely important. Because Jesus invited them that they may be with him. So how can we follow Christ together more closely? Cool. I'm a little over time, so I'm going to knock it off, but I appreciate it. Thanks for the opportunity.